For the second part of our video discussion, we are now going to consider here life's humble beginnings. We are going to discuss here different theories and hypotheses that are observed and studied by a lot of scientists regarding the origin of life on Earth became the perfect cradle for the proliferation and presence of different living organisms. Now, the very first theory that we are going to consider here is the theory that is stated by Svante Arrhenius, which is the theory of Panspermia. Panspermia, it is the theory that life on Earth originated from microorganisms or chemical precursors of life present in outer space. And whenever we are talking about these microorganisms and chemical precursors, they were actually delivered here on Earth by the presence possibly of comets or asteroids that simply bombarded the Earth during its early development. And once these chemical precursors are present here on the surface of the Earth, they will now be able to initiate life because Earth is considered as a suitable environment for those microorganisms and at the same time for those chemical precursors. Because Earth, if you're going to review your Earth science discussions on your junior high school, it is actually present on the Goldilocks zone. The Goldilocks zone, it is now the location in the solar system in which the planet is placed not too far or not too near to the sun, in which the temperature is just right. Earth is present on that optimum location, that the Earth is not too cold nor not too hot for the proliferation of life. After the panspermia, let's have a short trip down the memory lane with Friedrich Wöhler. Friedrich Wöhler accidentally synthesized organic compounds from inorganic chemicals in the year 1828. And with his discovery, it actually paved the way for the creation of more theories and hypotheses regarding the origin of life on Earth. With his discovery, accidental discovery or technically serendipity, during the year 1828, he created here the very first organic synthesis, or also known as organosynthesis. The process of organosynthesis, it is now the creation of organic compounds out of inorganic compounds. And with this discovery, a lot of scientists consider that organic compounds can actually be synthesized from inorganic compounds that is present on the early Earth. With this discovery, Alexander Ivanovich Oparin concluded and stated that many gases present on Earth's early atmosphere under very high temperatures might have formed simple organic compounds such as amino acids. And the statements done by Oparin was seconded by John Burson Sanderson Haldane, creating now the Primordial Soup hypothesis, in which the origin of life on Earth is because of the transformation during the gradual chemical evolution of particles that contain carbon in the primordial soup. Whenever we are talking about here the presence of the primordial soup, it is actually somewhat related to the concept of the creation of a certain type of broth. Okay? When it comes to the primordial soup, you actually need here different components. You actually need here different materials. Okay? These different materials, with the presence of extreme conditions, will actually create more complex materials. And all of these materials are actually present on a body of water. This body of water can either be inland or also present in the ocean or in the sea. With the presence of the different harsh conditions, it will actually lead to the formation of more complex molecules, hence the creation of the first building blocks. And after some time, after the creation of these building blocks, these biomolecules, these materials will combine to create now the very first set of cells, which are the very first set of living organisms on Earth. after some time, they will now create the complex eukaryotic organisms just like us human beings. When it comes to primordial soup, everything started on water. The presence of the key ingredients, and those key ingredients are actually from the Panspermia. And after some time, with the presence of the harsh environment, it now created more complex materials, which can now lead to the formation of life on Earth. Now, when it comes to the concept of primordial soup, an experimentation was actually done by Stanley Miller and Harold Yuri, which is also known as the Miller-Urey experiment. In the case of the Miller-Urey experiment, they actually mimicked here the condition that is present on the early Earth. It actually demonstrated spontaneous formation of complex organic molecules in a reducing atmosphere. Remember, all of these concepts are actually based from what was stated by Oparin and Haldane on the primordial soup hypothesis. It is evident here on the setup that they simply created that there is the presence of the sea or the water source. Then, because of the presence of very high temperature, it will now create water vapor, and this water vapor will now bombard with the presence of the different materials in the atmosphere. So, what are the different components of the atmosphere during the primordial Earth? Those are methane, ammonia, and even the presence of hydrogen gas. Now, after some time, these materials will now be present and subjected to harsh conditions just like the presence of lightning. And the lightning source that is present here, it is now created by means of different electrodes. And with the presence of these electrodes, it also created very high temperature in which materials undergone the concept known as chemical evolution. When it comes to the concept of chemical evolution, it is actually related to organosynthesis, in which inorganic materials will form together and combine and will change its structure to create organic compounds. And after some time, these materials and compounds will settle, and voila, the formation of the building blocks of life, all of which are actually supported by the concept of the primordial soup hypothesis, and the materials present in this primordial soup hypothesis is also provided by Panspermia. So these are the different leading theories and hypotheses and even experimentations done to consider the origin of life on Earth. And now, from the formation of the building blocks of life on Earth, let's now consider here the next part of our discussion, which is now all about the origin of organismal life on Earth, which is divided into two basic concepts. The first one, abiogenesis, and the second one, the concept of biogenesis. Once again, for the first part of our video presentation for this discussion, we discuss here the presence of the origin of life. Whenever we're talking about the origin of life, that is the building blocks of it, not life itself. For the second half, we are now going to discuss here the origin of organismal life. The reason why different organisms, just like us, human beings, originated here on Earth. Please take note that the discussion that we are going to have here is divided into two basic concepts, abiogenesis and biogenesis. And when it comes to this discussion, you will actually consider that even some philosophers and scientists during those times can also commit mistakes based on their judgment and based on failing to do scientific investigation. Now, let's start with abiogenesis. Abiogenesis, it is also known as the theory of spontaneous generation, and it is proposed by Aristotle. Then, this idea actually lasted for almost 2,000 years because a lot of scientists, a lot of philosophers do not dare to debunk what was stated by Aristotle. When it comes to the scientific community in the early times, it is actually considered as a taboo to discourage people to debunk a certain type of well-known philosopher. That is actually the problem. Without proper investigation, scientific investigation, and at the same time, the scientific culture will not proliferate, will not develop if we are not going to follow basic steps whenever we are investigating a certain type of phenomenon. That is the reason why this abiogenesis lasted for almost 2,000 years. And if you're going to consider this, it is somewhat related to the concept of myths and even urban legends and superstitious beliefs, because according to abiogenesis, frogs came from mud. Okay? It is also stated on page 5 of your module. Mice came from rags and even damp rice, and also the concept that maggots came from rotten meat. Those are actually the different things that is stated on abiogenesis. What are actually the different reasons why abiogenesis or spontaneous generation was debunked or disproved? There are different personalities which we should be thankful for disproving and creating different types of setup to disprove the concept of abiogenesis and creating a new concept known as biogenesis. Let's start with Francesco Redi during the year 1668. When it comes to Redi, he actually created here an experimentation when it comes to rotten meat, in which he considered here that abiogenesis, or the formation of maggots, is not actually because of direct spontaneous generation, but rather it is caused by flies. As you can observe here on our illustration, he created here different setups in which the meat is exposed while the meat is present on a jar that is possessing cheesecloth on its mouth. And after some time, he observed that flies laid eggs on those rotting meat. Maggots emerged from those eggs, in which he simply debunked that maggots came from rotten meat. After the experimentation done by Francesco Redi, on the year 1748, John Needham actually tested the claims of spontaneous generation by means of the utilization of broth from boiled mutton, which later on he covered with cork, and he simply concluded that the life force somewhat possibly entered the broth. That is the reason why it spoiled. But during the year 1767, Abbe Lazarus Spallanzani recreated the setup that was done by John Needham. He is actually considering here that there is a possibility that the observations done by John Needham is just concluded poorly. Lazarus Spallanzani somewhat concluded that spontaneous generation did not occur and that something entered the unsealed flask, in which Lazarus Spallanzani is not aware of. He doesn't know what is that certain type of material, but it is not considered as a life force as mentioned by John Needham or the other scientists prior to Lazarus Spallanzani, which is somewhat a lukewarm perception if we're going to consider here if Lazarus Spallanzani really disproved abiogenesis. Lazarus Spallanzani somewhat mentioned here that there's a possibility that there's the presence of the vital element, and this vital element will now be the reason why some organisms that is present on broth, even if it is already heated and boiled, will possibly come to life. The experimentation done by Lazarus Spallanzani is further improved by Louis Pasteur during the year 1861, in which Louis Pasteur considered here the concept of the germ theory by recreating the broth experiment and creating as one neck. On the observations done by Louis Pasteur during the year 1861, he observed that if a flask possessing as one neck will contain broth, And if you're going to boil the broth, after some time, even if air can freely enter this one neck, it will not actually contaminate or it will not create spoilage when it comes to the broth. But if you're going to remove the swan neck, even if this material or this broth is boiled for quite some time, microbial growth will happen. Louis Pasteur also observed that on the bottom portion of this swan neck, there's the presence of different types of particles and materials, in which he considered that these materials are actually suspended in the air, and these materials may contain microorganisms that will be the reason why broth leads to microbial growth and spoilage, hence creating the concept of the germ theory, that there are actually different types of organisms that is suspended in the air and not vital force. And with this, the concept of biogenesis started. Life came from life. So those are just some of the featured experimentations that simply debunk a biogenesis, which gave us now the idea of biogenesis. So for this particular part of our module, you can now answer here creating connections, in which please consider the different claims of spontaneous generation and how are you going to debunk the ancient belief or claims about the following. So this is the end of our discussion for the second part of our video presentation. Wait for the third video presentation, which will simply discuss the concept of the cell theory. See you then.